Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. We've got a full agenda ahead of us. I think we may as well make a start. Others may join as we make a start, and I'm sure people will have to come and go through the day, but those of you that are able to stay for the whole day, that's very much appreciated. And those of you that aren't, we completely understand, and thank you for making as much of it as you can do. So this morning we have a welcome from Suzanne Stewart, who is the local network lead at the University of Chester, and then we'll move on to introductions from the different chairs of our member groups and advisory committees, and then I'll give a brief report on where we've come from and where we're going effectively. So thank you again for coming, and Suzanne, over to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Marcus. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the annual meeting of the UK Reproducibility Network. As Marcus said, I've been honored with the task of opening the meeting and welcoming everyone to it, regardless of whether it's your first annual meeting or perhaps this is just one in a long line of annual meetings you've been to. So as Marcus said, I'm Suzanne Stewart. I work at the University of Chester, and my background is in psychology. I've been a local network lead since very nearly the beginning, early 2019. So I've really seen the UKRN grow and become the influential community that it is today. We have to acknowledge that influence comes from all the membership groups, all of us who are here, those of us who had to be absent today, who believe in its mission to reform research culture and practice. We see the power of what we're capable of when we look at our achievements and working towards making that vision a reality, from the wealth of resources that we have, like the common statements and case studies, to the projects like the Open Research Program and the Community Project. And we see it even more in the way it has inspired sister networks all around the world. We see it in the progress we make at our institutions and in our disciplines, even when that progress is made as frustratingly slow baby steps. In a more personal way, it's helped me find lots of other ways to contribute, and I'm sure that's the case for many of you. This year, I'm serving as the chair of the Center for Open Sciences Transparency and Openness Promotion, or TOP, Advisory Board. And a significant reason that I gained that role was because of my experience and work with the UKRN. I've also been able to bring that full circle as I recently presented about the updated TOP guidelines to my fellow local network leads. So it's great to come together today, as we do every year, to review what we've done and to make our plans for the future. In particular, today we'll have time for discussion across UKRN membership about a few key areas, and most happily celebrate our early career researchers with the Dorothy Bishop Prize. So I'll hand back over to Marcus now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Suzanne, for that introduction. I should also say thank you to Dolly, Will, Deanne, and others for doing all of the background work that hopefully will mean that we have a productive and seamless meeting today. There are some comments in the chat. Please do follow those, and some of them will be repeated for people who are joining late. I think it's still a quirk of Zoom that you can't see historical messages that were posted before you joined the meeting. So the next thing that we're going to do is have some very brief introductions from the different chairs of our member groups, our local network leads group, our institutional leads group, and our stakeholder group, as well as the chairs of our two advisory committees, our EDI advisory committee and our international advisory committee. And these groups constitute effectively the membership of UKRN. Our members are the local networks, the institutions, the stakeholder organizations, and the advisory committees do exactly what you might expect. They advise us and help us to navigate any challenges that we might encounter, but also give us advice on our future directions and our strategic goals. So I'm going to start with David Smales, who is chair of our local network leads group. David.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. So as Marcus says, I'm an assistant professor in psychology up at Northumbria University in Newcastle, and I've been chair of the local network leads for about 18 months now. And so in that role, I try to kind of coordinate our activities, try and foster some projects that get our group of local network leads a little bit stronger and larger. So trying to ensure that we get local network leads established at institutions where we don't currently have local network leads, and try to strengthen the networks that already exist. So we're trying to do some work at the moment, or primarily Will and Deanne are doing work, trying to kind of connect neighbouring institutions together and get the local network leads who work quite closely together geographically to work together a little bit more. As you might have seen from the report, it's been a busy year for the local network leads. It helped to develop a guidebook to kind of help with the onboarding process, and looking forward, one of the things that we kind of really want to do is increase the diversity of our local network leads. So we're going to be doing some work on succession planning and things like that over the next year. So that's who we are. I guess the kind of key thing to say is probably that we work kind of primarily at the grassroots level in our universities, so less to do with kind of top-down policies and more to do with embedding things at the grassroots level. And so Marcus, would it be handy if I pass straight on to Tom, who kind of does the other end of things?
That would be great, thank you.
Yep. And so I'll pass on to Tom Stafford, who is our chair of the institutional leads.
Thanks very much. I hardly need to repeat, but I am Tom Stafford. I'm at the University of Sheffield, where I am the research practice lead, so the institutional lead role for the UKRN, and I chair the institutional leads group. I'm in the second year of my 2-year term. We recently had our institutional leads gathering in Cardiff a couple of weeks ago, and every time I get together with the institutional leads, whether in person or online, I'm kind of re-inspired by the UKRN mission. And as David said, we the kind of the institutional leads have a bit more of a policy and, as you would expect, an institutional focus. So, personally, that's a lot of time spent in policy and research strategy meetings at my institution. And I think we really are making great progress in the institutional leads group to realizing the value of the UKRN as a network. So their ability to sort of talk to each other about what's happening in our different institutions and the different types of institutions that are part of the UKRN, and to kind of showcase good ideas, good initiatives that people are trialing across the UKRN network, and kind of hopefully transplant them so we can spread those good practice and good ideas. So maybe a shout out for an example of that. We've got an upcoming online seminar on reproducibility spot checks, which is being driven by Mark Kelso, who's institutional lead at Exeter. So look out for that as an example of kind of an interesting initiative. And I will pass back to Marcus, who will say he'll speak next.
Thanks, Tom. So next up is Claire from our stakeholder group. So Claire, over to you.
Hi, I'm Helen. Helen Clare.
Oh, sorry. I don't know where I got that. Sorry, yes. You tell the kind of morning I'm having. Sorry, Helen Clare.
No problem at all. Yeah, I'm Helen Clare. I'm from JISC, which is a non-profit digital data and technology agency focused on tertiary education, research and innovation, as you may know. We provide networks and other critical infrastructure, as well as licensing arrangements, advice and guidance, etc. And within JISC, I'm part of the sector strategy team, whose role is to ensure that JISC is driven by wider sector strategic needs, political needs, and even geopolitical movements, as well as our members. And that's why we're really keen to be part of UKRN, to help ensure that we're aligned and that we can support other initiatives as well. In terms of the stakeholder group, I think the stakeholder group is probably one of the newest member groups. I've been chair for just over a year. We have 2 supervisory board members. We've got Harvinder Virk, and Emma Ganley has just been elected last month. So I think, as well as being one of the newest, we are probably the most diverse as well, over 50 members from all different types of organisations, from funders, publishers, communities, libraries, software infrastructure providers. So I think that, again, that's one of the strengths that we can bring, is our experience and expertise from different areas, as well as learning more about the UKRN and its needs. The last year for the group, as I say, we're relatively new. We've been getting to know each other. We've had several meetings, 2 virtual cafes, 2 formal online meetings. I think one of the highlights was our get together in Bristol at the JISC office, where we again spent some time getting to know each other, trying to identify common challenges, looking at areas that we can work together, identifying sharing. And I think sharing methodologies was one of the areas that we certainly focused in on. And at that event, we also had a presentation from Jackie Thompson at the University of Bristol on a particular example of collaborative working, which was the Registered Reports Funding Partnership with Cancer Research UK. So we've been involved in various discussions with UKRN office, etc., around sustainability, terms of references. And particularly, I think the sustainability area is quite a good place that we can contribute, because many of our members have faced the same struggles, explored various different sustainability models. So we can support discussions there. In the future, we do want to continue to share with each other, get to know each other, so we can identify joint areas of interest. But I think one of our key objectives this year is to work more with with other member groups. So that's why the meeting today is really important. And also we'd like to say start that dialogue with other member groups through inviting to our meetings, and the special interest groups, which we'll be talking about later today. And just to say that I'm actually joining you from Krakow today, so I will be in and out. I'm at the Marie Curie Alumni Association conference, and we've just started with quite an interesting session talking about that geopolitical landscape and the importance of protecting research and all its values. So I'm particularly happy to be here today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. And apologies again for my brain falling over earlier. So the three member groups that we have are obviously the main moving parts of UKRN in terms of how we foster that spirit of collaboration and create opportunities to convene along the lines of what Helen was describing there for the stakeholder group. That exists across those three member groups, but we're also supported by advisory groups, advisory committees rather, that have slightly different areas of focus. One of those is the EDI Advisory Committee, and we have a new chair who has joined us recently, Savita, who is on the call, who will briefly introduce herself. So Savita, over to you.
Thank you, Marcus, and good morning, colleagues. It's really nice to connect with everybody as the new chair of the UKRN's EDI Advisory Committee. So I joined earlier this year. We've had one meeting so far as me and chair. In terms of my background, I'm Associate Director of EDI for Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Trust. Previous to that, I was 22 years a civil servant across many different government departments, always having HR and EDI as one of my anchors. In terms of our kind of focus this year, we're really looking to build on the foundations of the outgoing chair. So thank you to the outgoing chair, Shraddha, who's built the kind of structures and governance, and we're looking forward to now putting in smart actions for this year and to work with the committee to ensure we are most importantly accessible and have a process by which members can seek advice when needed, so time and space for these very important discussions. I think it's important also to note that actually across the pond, the attitudes of EDI is perhaps not what we share. So it's promising that actually the UK and specifically UKRN are really committed to equity, equality, diversity and inclusion. And actually we want to make sure that we're building equity into our research and opportunity it provides as a key priority, and we continue to do so. Bold and focused action is what I'm hoping to put in place this year to ensure, as I say, we continue our work towards this very important, I suppose, cause. I call it a cause, but actually it's just to ensure that we are accessible, we are being fair and open, and actually offers us the opportunity across the world in terms of being number one when it comes to research. So Marcus, I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and I look forward to connecting with you throughout the day.
Thanks, Savita. And just on that point, I say what I'm about to say often in the context of open research, but I think it applies equally to EDI, which is that there might well be moral reasons to work in a certain way, to be transparent or to be inclusive, for example, and to recognise the importance of EDI issues. Those moral reasons aren't to the exclusion of pragmatic or even selfish reasons for working in certain ways. That transparency that open research brings and the inclusiveness that consideration of EDI brings, I think just makes us better at what we do and brings more voices into our work and ensures that we represent the society that ultimately we're in service of. So I don't think it's zero sum in that respect. And I think that has been lost sometimes in conversations around EDI issues that have become, as Savita was alluding to, increasingly politicized. So I think we can make the case that these things are important to us, both for the moral reasons, but also for the pragmatic reasons that they are absolutely central to our mission fundamentally of trying to improve the quality of UK research, how it is done, who it is done by, and all the rest of it. So I think that's important to bear in mind. I hope that resonates with you, Savita, and with others as a way of framing these things. But I think we need to be able to tell that story strongly and be on the front foot to push back against some of these political countermeasures, if you want to call them that. We also have an international advisory committee, which really advises on long-term strategy, but also in particular how we interweave the work of UKRN with what is happening at an international and supranational level. Our chair is Anna Scheel, but she's not been able to join this morning for personal reasons. She will hopefully be able to join us later in the day. She has an agenda item that she is speaking to, the Dorothy Bishop Prize. But she sent us through some introductory comments, which I think Dolly has kindly agreed to read out. So Dolly, if that's still okay with you.
Yeah, morning everyone. So yeah, Anna sent through the role of the International Advisory Committee is to provide unsolicited and solicited input on UKRN vision and strategy and act as a critical friend to the Supervisory Board. Over the past year, this included input on structural improvements to help prevent and resolve potential conflicts within the UKRN, as well as on policy for the rapidly growing Federation of National Reproducibility Networks. As in previous years, a task force consisting of members of the IAC and the EDI IAC managed the call for the Dorothy Bishop Prize 2025, evaluated nominations and compiled a shortlist. This year, the task force implemented significant changes to the nomination procedure with the goal of increasing transparency for nominees and ensuring a more objective and fair evaluation process. On internal matters, the IAC elected Tony Ross-Hellower as Deputy Chair to serve alongside Anna Scheel, who continues to chair the group. A small turnover is anticipated, with Tom Hardwick stepping down from the committee and a new member planned to be selected. In addition, the IAC has refined its internal processes to make it easier for its members to raise and discuss critical or sensitive issues. In an effort to connect more closely with the UKRN community, the IAC chair has begun visiting meetings of other UKRN groups and committees. This is intended to provide the IAC with a better overview of current issues within the network and to lower the barrier for others to consult the committee. In the same vein, an email address was set up as a direct point of contact, and I'll paste that in the chat now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dolly. So as I say, hopefully Anna will join us later. If you've had a chance to look at the annual report, you'll see that there are brief reports from each of the chairs that you have just heard from or heard indirectly from, and they also describe some of the activities of their different member groups, which they touched on in their introductions today, but go into in a little bit more detail in that annual report. Part of the reason for these introductions is that we're now at a point, and I'll talk about this in a moment when I give my introductory comments, we're now at a point in the evolution of UKRN that people are starting to rotate through roles at a fairly steady pace. Our local network leads are stepping out and being replaced, our institutional leads similarly, our stakeholder representatives, and that's all healthy because it's part of that transition to a mature organization where we're not critically dependent on those that were there at the outset, if you like. But it also means that many people here may be at one of these meetings for the first time, maybe less familiar with some of the key personalities or the way in which we're structured. So I'm going to use a bit of my time in a moment to talk through the history of UKRN, where we've come from, where we are at the moment, and where we're looking to go to, partly to set up some of the later items on the agenda, but also just to give that background to people who may be less familiar with it. Although for many of you, you will have heard it all before. So if you have, feel free to use that as an opportunity to catch up on a few emails. But before I move on to that, does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask to any of the chairs? I guess we can't ask any questions of Anna, she's not with us, but any of the other chairs I'm sure would be happy to answer any quick questions if anyone has them. If you do, please pop up your virtual hand. If you're not familiar with Zoom, it's slightly counterintuitively at the bottom where it says react and there's a heart, which bears no relationship at all to raising your hand, but if you go into that, there is a raise hand function in there. I'm not seeing any hands go up. There is time at the end of the agenda for a general discussion, which is scheduled for 3:30, and we can use as much or as little of that as we see fit. And I'm sure the chairs, those that are still there during that part of the agenda, will be happy to answer any questions then. So I mentioned that I was going to go through the UKRN's history. What I'm going to do is in a moment just share my slides, because I have a few of those that illustrate where we've come from and where we're going, mostly where we've come from. And again, some of you will be familiar with that, but I think it's worth reiterating. So let me just check. There's no one date that you can trace the origins of UKRN to, but a good starting point is a meeting that was held at the Wellcome Trust, convened by Wellcome, Academy of Medical Sciences, Medical Research Council and BBSRC to discuss issues of reproducibility and reliability of biomedical research. That had been discussed for several years before that. You can further trace that back to 2005 and John Ioannidis' paper. Plenty of people had written on the topic. That was the first point, in the UK at least, at which funders started to take this sort of thing seriously. And a few academics, myself, Dorothy Bishop, Chris Chambers, Lara Fortunato, Malcolm McLeod in particular, but others as well, were at that meeting and saw an opportunity to start lobbying funders for support to actually take concrete steps to address these issues, not just at the funder level, but across all parts of the research system, including researchers themselves and research enablers at that grassroots level. So there followed from that a period of lobbying. We wrote this paper, and many of those people that I've just mentioned were authors on that paper that illustrated what we saw as some of the problems. This again was very much focused on biomedical and life sciences at the time, but we identified not just what the issues were, but what potential solutions there might be to some of these threats to how research was conducted, and also who the organizations were, or the elements of the research system were, that had levers that they could bring to bear to implement some of those proposals. And that included researchers and research enablers themselves, but it also included publishers, funders, learning societies, institutions, and so on. And it was that that provided the starting point for thinking about how UKRN might be structured into the member groups that we have today, the local network leads representing that grassroots community of researchers and research enablers, as David was talking about, the institutions that hold much of the culture and incentives that we work within, the hiring and promotion criteria, for example, the training that is offered to us. And Tom spoke briefly about how we work at that level. And then, of course, the stakeholder organizations, the publishers, the funders, the learning societies that Helen was talking about, that again shape the incentives and the incentive structures that we work within. So that was the starting point for starting to think about what a network set up to channel all of that grassroots energy that was apparent at the time might look like, in order to bring about system change, as opposed to just focusing on one isolated part of it. But of course, to do that, we would need a little bit of support, and we were able to bring different funders in particular, but also publishers, learning societies and others together to a meeting here in Bristol back in 2018 with some support from JISC, courtesy of a certain Neil Jacobs, who was working at JISC at the time, but also with the backing of the Economic and Social Research Council as one of UKRI's research councils that was keen to support something in this space. And the discussion there was around how we could do this in a way that provided that coordination, but also retained ownership of the solutions by the community of those involved in the research process across all levels of the system, again, in a way that is represented in our member group. And what we were able to do at that meeting was get some modest short-term funding to appoint an administrator, set up a website, and get the ball rolling. So we formally launched in 2019 at a meeting at King's College London. And this was just before the pandemic. There was a lot of grassroots energy, as I mentioned, around issues of research quality, open research, reproducibility more generally. Lots of initiatives were being set up. The Reproducibility Journal Club is one of those that was set up by some then PhD students at the University of Oxford, Amy Orban, Sam Parsons and Sophia Kruvel. And also, for example, again, the Right Science Club that was set up by another PhD student at the time, Sam Westwood, who then was at King's College London. These initiatives were not our initiatives at UKRN, but we were able to support and amplify them, and that's something that we continue to do today through the initiatives that we support, where there are activities that are aligned with our interests, our goals, and where we can provide a platform or otherwise amplify those initiatives in a way that hopefully helps them to grow and to thrive, but also, of course, benefits us by providing, for example, activities that our local networks can engage in. So that was the starting point, and we were still at that point quite small, primarily comprised of local networks, that grassroots community that was really the starting point for UKRN. But we were beginning to get institutions to consider joining formally, and we had the beginnings of a stakeholder group at that point that comprised the funders, the publishers, and those other sectoral organisations that I mentioned. The timing was quite good because there was a lot of interest in research culture and research integrity more generally, and very early on in our existence, we started to be called upon by other sectoral organisations to provide input into some of these reports that were emerging around the time. In particular, the UKRI commissioned report on research integrity we contributed to, along with the UK Research Integrity Office. That was a report that was written by VTI but commissioned by UKRI, and there was also a parallel piece of work done by Wellcome around research culture. So the timing was fortunate, and that, I think, accelerated our growth, and we saw a large number of local networks emerge very quickly, but also in a shorter space of time than we'd anticipated, a reasonably large number of institutions joined formally as institutional members to provide that link through to senior management and the incentive structures that are held by institutions. Our strategy had always been to use that short-term funding to sustain us for 2 or 3 years until we could get more substantial programmatic funding, and we were able to do that through a Research England Development Fund award, which continues to support our open research programme and which has another couple of years left to run, and many of you will be familiar with that. That's been running largely at the institutional level, although obviously supported by that grassroots community that I mentioned. But we've also been able to obtain further funding for the community project led primarily by Will and Deanne, that you'll be familiar with, that works more at the local network level. So we have complementary projects now, both fairly substantial, that support 2 of the major elements of our structure. And you can see on the left here some of those other initiatives that I mentioned, those activities, enterprises set up by others that we are supporting. And so where we have got to, as you can see on the right-hand side, is a pretty rich network of local networks and institutional members. And in many cases, there are both local networks and institutional leads at a single institution. And we're keen for those 2 individuals to work in partnership and to advocate for each other, to challenge each other. They provide very different functions, one being the grassroots, the voice of the grassroots research and research enabling community, one operating at the senior management level and hopefully holding senior management's feet to the fire. And they work best, I think, if they work in partnership. But of course, we recognise that there are challenges to how that's done, in particular for local network leads who may not be well supported by their institution in terms of their time being protected or resources being allocated to them. So that's an ongoing challenge, how we can ensure that those that are in those roles are well supported by their institutions and given freedom to operate. At the institutional level, the challenge at the moment is the financial one that this whole sector is facing, and the extent to which universities can justify protecting the time of those institutional leads. And so part of the work that we'll be discussing today around our longer term sustainability is how can we articulate the value of what we do in a way that will convince institutions that are looking very carefully at their finances. Going back really to that point I was making earlier, there may be moral reasons to do what we do, but what are the hard-nosed, pragmatic benefits to an institution of being part of UKRN, and how can we articulate that and to an extent quantify that in a way that will allow those institutions to remain part of UKRN and to support our activity, but also convince them potentially at some point in the future to support us financially. At the moment, institutions don't have to pay a fee to be part of UKRN, but the funding that we have is time limited. And if we want to continue as an entity in some form, then obviously we need to be able to pay the salaries of the core team that support our activities, pay for the maintenance of our website, pay for all of the activities that we deliver, and so on. Exactly how we do that is going to take some careful thought. And as Helen has alluded to in her introduction, lots of the organizations in our stakeholder group have experience of this kind of thing, transitioning from an informal academic collaboration, which we still are, into something a little bit more formal, substantial, and sustainable. That's the challenge that we face going forward over the next couple of years. So I think it's important to bear in mind that at heart, we are still a peer-led network of networks. Our members are those local networks, those institutional members, those stakeholder organizations, and those connect us to a community of people, the researchers, the research enablers, the senior academics, the people working in those stakeholder organizations. And that community, particularly the grassroots community of researchers and research enablers, is the thing that gives us our legitimacy, our credibility, and means that we occupy a distinctive space within the sector, unlike other organizations, and give us what I think is our kind of honest broker status, where we are seen as an organization that can provide advice, support, whatever it might be, to other activities in a way that is informed by and legitimized by that grassroots community, but is also done in a way that is fair, transparent, equitable, and so on. And finally, as you can see at the bottom left of this slide, we now have national networks modeled on UKRN in, I think, over 20 other countries and regions. We have a regional network in Africa where individual countries typically don't have the critical mass to support an individual reproducibility network. I was just a few months ago in Lviv in Ukraine for the launch of the Ukrainian reproducibility network, and we were also joined by researchers from Georgia for the launch of their reproducibility network. So we have very good representation of reproducibility networks across Europe, but also in most other continents, in North America, South America, and in Australia, for example, as well as that regional network in Africa. So we now have a supranational mechanism for coordination, collaboration, that convening function that I talked about earlier. I think that's all put us in a pretty strong position, but I think it's also fair to say that we've come a long way in 5 years, 6 years, and that is testament to all of the energy and enthusiasm from those individuals and those communities that were there from the outset. And as I mentioned earlier, what's really heartening is that as people have rotated out of roles, new people have come into roles, I think that ethos of collaboration has continued. I think the energy has continued, even during a period when the sector is under a considerable amount of stress. And I think that is testament not just to those individuals and their commitment to the kinds of things that we're trying to do through UKRN, but also to the value that we bring and the fact that we are seen as doing something useful. And I think that's the key thing that we need to be focusing on. What are the things that we're doing that are valuable to individuals, to institutions, to the sector as a whole, including all of the organizations in our stakeholder group? And how can we make sure that we are able to articulate that value and work in a way that ensures our at least medium-term sustainability and hopefully our longer-term sustainability, recognizing that one of the ways in which we might be seen as successful is if we're not needed anymore. If all of the things that we do become so common practice that there's no longer a need for a UK reproducibility network to bring all of those activities together and to provide that challenge to the sector. I think we're a little way off that yet, but if we did ever get to that point, I think that would be a success, not a failure, if we decided to turn off the lights and call it a day. But like I say, I think we're a little bit away from that for now. What I will also say is that the annual report, which captures what we've done over the last year, is a good account of all of our different activities, but I think captures also the richness of what we've been doing. And again, that energy that is apparent across the whole of the UKRN community. I'd be very interested in people's thoughts on what that report says about us as an organization. And if you share the view and I'm not exactly impartial in this, that actually I think it feels like the report of a mature, established organization. I think in the last 5 or 6 years, we've moved from being, if you like, a slightly edgy startup with a lot of disruptive energy, bringing a certain amount of challenge to the sector. I think we want to keep a bit of that kind of activist feel to how we work. But we also need to deliver that in a way that brings people with us and allows us to engage constructively with very different parts of the system. Like I say, the grassroots communities, the institutions, the stakeholder organizations, and so on. I hope that we are maintaining that balance reasonably well and now have a rich range of projects and activities that we can be quite proud of, and which I think demonstrate, again, our value to the sector. But that's something that we can perhaps discuss, and people may have any comments on that. I'm going to stop in a moment and see if people have any thoughts, questions, opinions. We have a rolling 3-year strategy, as well as an annual plan that is slightly more tactical in nature in terms of what we're going to be doing this year specifically that will move us in the direction of our strategic objectives. That rolling strategy and that annual plan are intended to allow us to be agile and to course correct as the sector evolves. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we set ourselves up, the sector wasn't under such obvious financial pressure as it is now, for example. So we're having to adjust as we go to take those changes in the sector into account. It's a difficult time to start thinking about sustainability because anything that involves asking an institution for money is not necessarily going to be that well received. But equally, if we can get our sustainability plan right now, that will future-proof us, because I would hope that the situation won't ever get much worse than this, in which case anything that flies now in the context of that very difficult environment will hopefully continue to resonate with institutions in the future, hopefully in a period where the financial situation and the general situation improve and become slightly more benign. But it's no bad thing to be developing these ideas in a context where we have to really sharpen our thinking and make sure that we are clear on what the value is that that we bring. So the annual report is available for everyone to have a look at and comment on, and put out in front of people who we think need to see what we're doing and what we're offering the sector. The strategy and annual plan are to be approved today, but again have been out for extensive consultation, and we'll be talking in a little bit more detail later in the next part of the agenda about our sustainability options and what we can be doing to maximize the value of all of that. So I'm going to stop there. We still have about 15 minutes left for any discussion. So if anyone has any comments, then please do mention them now. As ever, if you'd like to say anything, pop your hand up. Crispin.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you. That was really, really helpful and great. I want to make a comment, which I realize may be out of turn in more than one way. It may be out of turn, first of all, because I recognize I'm not plugged into the talking about the issue. And it may be out of turn because this may be something we discuss later. But I just want to share a concern when you raise the prospect of needing to ask institutions for money. I'm in Edinburgh, where one of the institutions that actually is running at a surplus, but they're still talking about cutting something like 10% of staff. And we get emails where they're talking about everything being on the table, even down to like cutting printing budgets. So that's the context that we're in. And I don't have anything further at this moment to contribute other than a sense of wariness that if there's a reliance or an expectation, we'd have to rely on institutions to be paying money. I'm cautious about that. That's just what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I think we would all agree with that. Two things. First of all, we don't need to start asking anyone for money now because we have funding that will see us out for another couple of years. But at some point, we need to move beyond a model that is reliant on grant funding to a model that includes multiple sources of income. And we will be talking about this in the next session when Neil takes us through the value propositions that we've been developing. Exactly what that model looks like is still up for grabs, and we have some time to develop it. And it may be that we decide that asking institutions to pay a membership fee will not be part of our sustainability model, or it may be. Even if we did ask institutions for free, it would only be one source of income, and we would need to have multiple sources of income, partly because we don't want to become too dependent on any one single source of income. And in fact, that's the risk that we have at the moment, that we are critically dependent on grant funding, principally from Research England, but we have a bit of legacy funding left over from that earlier phase that I mentioned. And that's a risk as well, because grant funding comes to an end and there's no guarantee that it will be renewed. So you're right that certainly now wouldn't be the time, but I think we also do need to recognize that if we are offering something valuable to institutions that they see as valuable, it is not unreasonable for us to ask for a modest contribution to our operating costs. We just need to be careful to do that in a way that makes it clear what the value is to the university and makes the request digestible, if you like, in terms of the amount that we might ask for. But at the moment, it's still all up for grabs and for discussion, and that's what we'll be talking about in the next session. So certainly not out of turn. I think that's the kind of conversation that we need to be having, and I think we need to be asking each other those difficult questions and challenging in that way. But I think we would all recognise that sensitivity that you mentioned. Any other comments, opinions, questions? So later on in the agenda, we have a series of votes to ratify our revised terms of reference and our strategy and annual plan. I've talked about our strategy and annual plan, and of course, you should have seen those documents. They were attached to the invitations that you received. The terms of reference were substantially updated last year and approved. What tends to happen is that over the course of the year, we spot glitches, inconsistencies, and so on, or recommendations are made to us by members of our community, by our member groups, by our advisory committees, and we put all of those recommendations and glitches that we spotted into a virtual bucket and revise the terms of reference on an annual basis to try and deal with as many of those as possible in one go. So that's what is in front of you today. It's not as radical a change to or update to our terms of reference as last time, but it still needs to be ratified. The reason for revising our terms of reference last time and continuing to revise them is that we need a governance structure that is appropriate to the size and maturity of UKRN as it is now. Our original terms of reference that we drafted 6 or 7 years ago were no longer fit for purpose because we were more than just that kind of slightly edgy group of primarily researchers, and now have a much larger community, much broader representation, and are responsible for much more funding. Our terms of reference now, I think, are adequate to provide the governance that we need around that. They provide a much more democratic mechanism, which I think is healthy, but we will continue to revise them and update them. And if you do spot anything that you think could do with being looked at over the course of the year, please do let us know and we'll put it into the bucket for next year. I think there will be minor revisions pretty much every year, but hopefully we won't need another substantial revision for a little while yet. And the terms of reference as they are partly set up to, again, be future-proofed so that when we move into that next phase in a couple of years' time, when we move into sort of UKRN 2.0 or perhaps 3.0, depending on how you think about it, and are set up as a sustainable sectoral organization, those terms of reference should still be fit for purpose when we move into that new phase. And this meeting is currently just our informal annual meeting, but we are bringing more formal elements to it, such as that item on the agenda for members' business where we ratify our terms of reference and our strategy and annual plan, because this is effectively our annual general meeting. And so that semi-legal business, if you like, is conducted here. So I hope that all makes sense. I'm not seeing any more hands go up. I'll pause just in case anyone does have any questions or comments on that. We are slightly ahead of time. So Neil, what I'm going to propose is that we could break now and maybe come back at 11 and start the value proposition report slightly early.
Yep. Okay.
Are you happy with that?
Yeah.
And then if we do get to lunch slightly early, we can just have a slightly longer lunch. I don't think anyone will complain too much about that. But if we have a break there, if you do have any questions that you don't want to put your hand up for, feel free to pop stuff into the chat as well, of course. But if not, let's have a short break, grab a hot drink of your choice if you want to, and we will reconvene at 11 o'clock UK time. I think most of us are UK based, but just in case you're not, that's the top of the hour from where we are now. So see you in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. One thing I will quickly say before I hand over to Neil that I should have said in the last bit where I was banging on for far too long is that I mentioned earlier that we're now at the point where people are rotating in and out of roles, and that I think is demonstrating the maturity of the organisation, but also the its strength in the sense that it's not critically dependent on any one or two key personalities. And of course, in that context, I myself will be moving on. I think most people have heard by now from Bristol to Bath on the 1st of May. If you haven't heard by now, I am moving on from Bristol to Bath on the 1st of May to a new role there. That will mean that I will no longer be the institutional lead for Bristol. A successor will be found at Bristol. Thank you, Jenny, that's very kind. That then means that I won't have that elected role on the supervisory board and will no longer be the supervisory board chair. So there will be rotation there as well. I will still attend supervisory board meetings given my role within what we're now calling the UKRN executive, UKRN central, if you like, because, for example, I'm PI on the Open Research Programme. So that's another evolution of our terms of reference. But I think, again, that's going to be a useful challenge to us as a community, as an organisation, the extent to which we can carry on without missing a beat when people, even in those kinds of positions, rotate out and move on. So I think that's all good. I think that's all testament to our strength and maturity. It will mean that we'll all need to make sure that the show stays on the road, if you like, and those responsibilities will then fall on other people. But I think we're well set up to catch that ball and run with it, if that's not too sporting a metaphor. So Neil, with that, over to you.
Thank you, Marcus. Hello, everyone. So Marcus has already set this session up really well. We're thinking about the value proposition. What value does UKRN offer to you, its members? And therefore, what kinds of sustainability models can we be thinking about, should we be thinking about? I've put in the chat there a link to the slides that you're about to see. And those slides really, and the few words that I'm going to say alongside them, set up some discussions, some breakout discussion groups, which we're going to ask you to go into. Those discussion groups are going to be mixed, so we'll have stakeholders and local network leads and institutional leads all in the same breakout groups. And I think that is part of the point of UKRN, to enable those cross excuse me, sector conversations. And in this case, thinking about UKRN itself. So I'm going to share the slides and let's see if that works. Could somebody tell me a thumbs up?
Yep, all good.
Brilliant, thank you, Dolly. So that QR code takes you to the slides as well, should you wish to do that. I'd suggest that you have a look at the slides, because when we come to the discussion groups, I think they might be useful. They might not. You have documents that were sent out by Dolly as well that go into a bit more detail than these slides are going to, so those may be useful as well. So what I'm going to cover in the next few minutes, thinking a little bit about UKRN sustainability, reprising some of the themes that Marcus has already mentioned, talk about the member survey that many of you were good enough to fill in at the back end of last year. And therefore, as a result of that, move on to thinking about some of the value propositions. So what is the value that UKRN offers to you? And that's one of the things that I hope that we can discuss in those groups. And then thinking about the member benefits and as a corollary of that, what the executive, what the office really needs to be focusing on. What are our priorities? What do you need us to do? So let's step through that. This really does reinforce what Marcus said. We have no core resource other than the voluntary, I guess, contributions of members of UKRN, and of course that is the main resource that we as a community have is ourselves and the time that the members are willing and able to devote to the sorts of work that we're doing. Our financial income for, I guess, the activities that we're doing, and also for the office, for the executive, is related to projects, and that money is going to run out at some point. I've said August 26. We have some funds to take us beyond that, so it may be not quite as cliff edgy as that might make it seem, but clearly relying solely on project funding is a risk, and so we do need to diversify the range of resources that we have available, the range of revenue streams. And our sustainability is, as I say, closely related to the value that we offer. So in order to get a little bit into what value UKRN does provide for yourselves, why you bother being part of it, we ran this survey at the back end of last year. And what we did was present you with a set of statements that you could respond to about the potential values that UKRN offers, either to you as an individual or to you as a representative of one of the UKRN members, and some sort of net promoter questions, some overall questions about whether or not UKRN is something that you would recommend. We got 90 responses, which is an amazing response, really, from around 160 odd members. You can see the responses from the various member groups there. So reasonably confident that this is a good representation of your views. You've got the detailed survey findings there in the documentation that Dolly circulated, including nearly a dozen graphs, which I am not going to step through. You'll be very grateful to know. So the TLDR, the messages that I took from the survey, maybe you took different ones, but these are the ones that I took from the survey, are broadly speaking that institutional leads are currently the most positive about UKRN. That's probably not surprising given the open research programme and the sort of activities and funding that's gone along with that. Then local network leads, who have of course been a core part of UKRN for a long time. Stakeholders not yet seeing the specific value, but as Helen was saying earlier, it's early days. All of the proposed activities that were in the survey were seen as important, which is gratifying, but there is probably, as ever, room for improvement. UKRN is seen as a way of supporting collaboration, which is of course our key purpose, supporting collaboration, but we're not quite at the stage where members would recommend UKRN for that, and that's an honest view that we need to take on board. We're very good at sharing news and events and resources, which is great. We're very good at nationally and possibly internationally influencing, which is more important for some members than others. In terms of training skills and development, perhaps there's least consensus around that. We are quite good at recognizing each other's contributions and using UKRN's reputation as a sort of a way of recognizing those contributions and rewarding them. But perhaps there's work to do there too, and we'll cycle back to some of those findings later on. So as a result of that, we took those survey findings and some thoughts about them to various conversations with member groups, so the local network leads and the institutions and the stakeholders have all had chance to have some conversations around those survey findings and to think about what kind of value proposition, what kind of value UKRN can and should be offering on the basis of those survey findings. And you've got a detailed set of tables in the documentation that's been sent round. I'm not going to show you detailed tables. I'm going to try to summarize them in a little bit more punchy way. So this is, as a local network lead, this is what I've heard from the survey and from those conversations. As a local network lead, I find, what are the things I do? One of the things I do is I find interested people and I provide a regular forum for them. That's one of the things I do as a local network lead. And UKRN helps by providing guidance, materials, and support. One of the things I do as a local network lead is I share information between my network and the wider sector, other local network leads, special interest groups, and so on. And UKRN helps provide some routes for that sharing. And one of the things I do as a local network lead is I influence the national agenda, and UKRN helps. It provides opportunities for local network leads to do that and to raise their own profile and to strengthen UKRN's reputation in the process. So that's a virtuous circle. That's a good thing. Do you agree? Is that a fair summary? Is that a complete summary of what local network leads are doing and how UKRN helps? I'm going to do something similar now for institutional leads, again based on a survey, but also conversations at a recent institutional lead retreat. So one of the things institutional leads do, so I inform and lead institutional strategy and policy, and UKRN helps by providing some models for that. As an institutional lead, I share and learn from practice at other institutions and from stakeholders, and UKRN helps that sharing by sharing news, resources, hosting events, and so on. And as an institutional lead, I influence the national agenda, and similarly UKRN helps by providing opportunities, raising my profile, strengthening UKRN's reputation in the same way. Yes? Do you agree with that? Does that sound a complete and accurate picture? What would you add? So these are all parts of the discussions that I'm hoping that you're going to have in a minute. Stakeholders, similarly, so as a stakeholder, stakeholders are so diverse that it was quite hard to crystallize this out. So it's perhaps at a slightly higher level of abstraction, but I hope most stakeholders will be able to see themselves here. So as a stakeholder, I promote good practices in research and research support, and UKRN helps by providing some resources and news that help share those good practices. One of the things I do as a stakeholder is I translate strategic aspirations into practical operations. So those could be tools, they could be training, they could be sort of funding opportunities, there could be a whole range of different kinds of practical operations. But one of the things I do is translate that strategy into that practice. And UKRN maybe helps by hosting special interest groups. Well, it started special interest groups recently, relevant to my work. And finally, as a stakeholder, I build relationships and collaborations, and networking is the key aspect to that, and UKRN helps by offering opportunities for that networking. Stakeholders, yes? Is that a fair picture of how you either are or would like to be working through UKRN? So that's a sort of summary view of what I think the core value propositions are for each of the three member groups, and they're noticeably different, and that's fine. I think UKRN does probably offer different things to different kinds of members, and should do. So the last thing I want to quickly talk about before asking you to discuss what I've introduced is, what then are the member benefits, and what should the office be doing to help? Excuse me. Busy slide. Sorry about that. This is kind of based on a theory of change. Many of you will recognize the Centre for Open Science theory of change triangle on the right-hand side there. So if you're keen to instigate a change, what you need to do is to make it possible, then make it easy, then make it normative, then make it rewarded, and only finally make it required. And ideally do it in that order. Now, clearly UKRN is not going to make anything required. It's not that sort of organisation. Those sorts of requirements come from other places in the research system. So I'm only focusing on the first four, if you like. And the focus here is going back to UKRN's purpose, which I've put at the top here from our terms of reference, the purpose of UKRN is to enable our members to collaborate, so they're better able to conduct and promote rigorous and reproducible and transparent research. So is it the case then that these are the core functions of the UKRN executive? This is what you need the office to do to help UKRN offer you the value that it should be doing. So are we making collaboration possible by supporting funding applications and by helping you make the case that you can devote some time to the sorts of work that we do together? Is it a priority for the UKRN executive to make collaboration easy by sharing news and resources between yourselves, supporting networking and special interest groups and member groups and so on, and providing collaboration platforms and tools, which it's arguable whether we really do that terribly well at the moment, but perhaps that would be helpful if we enabled that through those sorts of ways. Do we make collaboration across the UKRN membership normative? Do we make it the sort of expected thing to do, the expected way to behave? And we could do that through sharing news of collaborations widely, both sort of within UKRN but also beyond, so that people see that this is just the way that we do things here. But also, can we help members influence the wider system so that it begins to promote that kind of collaboration? And there's various ways we can do that through enabling sort of consultation responses, if UKRI or others have consultations, and drafting texts around that. And finally, do you want the UKRN executive to make collaboration rewarding? So one of the ways in which we can do that, and we're increasingly looking at, is can we sort of track the ways in which you work together and report that back to you, so that you have evidence that you can use, that you have made a difference, you've worked together in a collaborative way. And for example, institutions might be able to use that kind of information in something like the REF People, Culture and Environment submissions. And can we help members to recognise and reward each other? So even within UKRN, can we help us sort of have a recognition economy, if you like? For example, institutional leads rewarding and recognising the major contributions that local network leads make within their institution. So yes, does that ring true? Are those the sorts of things that you want the office to do, the executive to do? Do they enable the sorts of value and the sorts of benefits that you're looking for from the UKRN? So in a minute, Dolly's going to throw us into a set of breakout groups. None of those breakout groups is going to have a chair. You're going to have to freestyle and find a chair or work in an unchaired kind of way. Each of the groups is going to have a UKRN person there to take notes. And there'll be a feedback session afterwards. So these are the questions. You've seen these slides before. Are these the sorts of value propositions that make sense to you? Are these the sorts of things that you're looking for from UKRN? And is this the kind of activity that you want the office to do in order to support that value? So those are the questions that I'd like us to focus on in those breakout groups. So hopefully you've got those slides. So when I take them off the screen, that's not going to be alarming for you. Any questions before we go into the breakout groups? Okay, I suggest we go into the breakout groups for around 40 minutes. There's quite a lot to get through. They're mixed groups, so you're going to be talking about, you know, what's meaningful for stakeholders, for local network leads and institutions, and those will be different things. So let's go into the breakout groups for 40 minutes, come back at 12 for a feedback session. Right, we all back? We could have kept talking for a while, so I hope the other groups had lots of interesting things to say. Dolly, how many groups were there?
8.
8. I wonder whether we know who we are. I'm assuming that because it was the UKRN folk who were taking notes, that it's the UKRN people who might be feeding back. That may be an assumption that gets challenged at some point. But
I specifically said I wasn't going to, but my group knows who is.
All right. Okay. Dolly, you're going to have to guide us through, because you're the only one who knows who was in each breakout group. So can you ask in turn each of the breakout groups to feedback? And we only, we haven't got a huge amount of time. So just sort of maybe 2, 3, 4 maximum key points that came out of your discussions, really brief.
So room 1 was Amy, Daniel, Henry. Not sure who's feeding back from that room. Kirsten, Mark, Matteo.
Amy's just messaged saying she was taking notes and is happy to feedback. Or sorry, am I happy to she's saying, am I happy to feedback? Yes, I am happy to feedback. Yes. So we had discussion, local network lead description was good. We thought it could be extended. Oh, the big point here. There was one big point. It's currently too self-referential, the right-hand side. So UKRN will do these things to support UKRN activities. Doesn't represent a good value proposition to somebody who isn't already part of UKRN. So it should be UKRN does these things to support research integrity or to improve the lives of researchers. But any reference to UKRN is a bit circular. And so that was the main thing. That was for the local network lead description and for the institutional lead description. We thought horizon scanning should be included as well as an activity, and event hosting and things like that. For the stakeholders, one of our overarching themes was about trustworthiness. And how do you do that? You gain trustworthiness by doing things that allow people to trust you, and that is being open is one of those things. So we should be leveraging that. One of the major benefits for stakeholders is bringing insights across disciplines. We thought this was efficient because you could do this in your own institution if you've got lots of disciplines, but because we're taking 1 or 2 from each institution, it's less burdensome on each institution, and that's a real value proposition. We get better things. So sharing information, getting ideas and collaborations, all these things are the value proposition. We talked about how UKRN can help with engaging people in research from a PPI kind of perspective, because people trust open research, and that's important to get people involved in research. And we did have a quick chat about the kite marking for institutions, this idea that came up at the away day. Should the UKRN provide a kite mark? And we discussed that a little bit. We felt that if that was to happen, interim auditing and checking would help prevent a tick boxing exercise. So Athena Swan, you get your award, and who knows what happens afterwards. It doesn't get checked in the interim. Whereas if we were going to do this properly, to stop it being a tick mark, you'd have interim checks. That was everything, I think.
Thanks, Mark. Neil, room 2 was your room.
It was. Now, Thomas told me that my audio was poor, so I put headphones in. Can you hear me okay? Yes, good. Hopefully better. So a few points from group 2. When we're talking about UKRN sustainability, one of the things that we're mostly should be talking about is sustainability of the people, because actually it's the people who are the UKRN. So more of a focus on that. One of the things that people want is some achievable goals and missions, so something tangible, perhaps short-term, targeted, that is that we can all focus on. Clearly, we had a lot of conversation about how UKRN needs to both demonstrate the financial benefits for institutions, and we did talk mainly about institutions, or flipping that on its head, what do institutions lose by not being a member? And there were lots of aspects to that. One of the things that UKRN could usefully be doing is helping the development of effectively protocols and guidelines for disciplinary good practice in reproducibility. We focused particularly on computational reproducibility, but I don't think the point was limited to that. And indeed, if we can develop those sorts of things or inform the development of those sorts of things across different disciplines, that would help us become more obviously not a niche organisation. And that would benefit all kinds of members and potential members of UKRN in different sorts of ways, including publishers as well as institutions and researchers. And the final thing I'll just report was that I think we might need to get a bit smarter at targeting particular intervention points in the research system. So, for example, grant capture is an obvious one, and reward and recognition is one, but also PhD doctoral processes and standards around doctoral training, QAA subject statements around the ways in which subjects are taught, and there may well be other ones around those too.
So room 3 was Deanne, Ica, Emma, Olavo.
Hi. So we had mainly LNLs in our group, as well as Olavo from the Brazilian National Reproducibility Network and Emma Ganley from the stakeholder group. So we talked first about the LNL slide, and there was broad agreement with the points that were on the slide. And a couple of LNLs said that their common experience was that the library offers the best collaboration and sort of knowledge of what's happening across an institution. And I could describe it as the best collaborator in terms of getting information out. It was very valuable. We were seen as good at providing guidance and materials and support. There was a very strong yes on that. And in terms of helping strengthening UKRN collaborations, although the comment that one of the bottom kind of orange speech bubble was quite a complicated statement. There was one that kind of like sort of fed back into itself. It was a very complicated way of saying something. What I could suggest is that in terms of the UKRN helping provide collaboration through events, the LNL retreat is a great example of that. But it would be nice to have ad hoc support for more spontaneous events. There doesn't seem to be that capability at the minute, and it'd be nice to have that. From the stakeholder perspective, Emma really strongly encourages the LNLs and ILs to look at the fantastic range of organisations that make up the stakeholder group. When she sort of started coming to the first stakeholder engagement groups, you know, she was really amazed at the calibre of organisations that are in this group. It's an incredibly powerful group, and it can really help the researchers within local networks and institutions because there's a lot of goodwill within the stakeholder group, and it could be that stakeholders can get involved with and create opportunities for researchers that aren't available in an academic pathway, that are new routes out into innovation and development and doing things that stakeholders offer. And it's, you know, they're a really valuable group. And one thing, we were talking on the last slide about collaboration and agreeing that, you know, we're good at offering collaboration. But again, we came back to this thing where if we knew more about what each other was doing, so if LNLs were more aware of the activities within a stakeholder group, for example, that there'd be more opportunities for collaboration. And the special interest group came up here, so the computational reproducibility one that members of our group are involved in. And at the minute, they're reviewing tools and practices, and that's like a very important thing. But we could actually move beyond that. We could start looking at innovation rather than reviewing. So again, it's this sort of the next steps and how we can use the different groups to do something new. And that's very exciting. And there's a lot of, you know, hopefully a lot of energy around that. The last thing was about collaboration platform. And this is where we can fall down a bit in that we don't provide a good collaboration platform. And it was said that this, you know, if we could do this better, it would be a real step change in UKRN evolution. And that we should be better at broadcasting our outputs. For example, a dedicated page for UK collaborations. You know, who are we collaborating with? What are we doing? Let's shout about that a bit more. And also comms around knowing where everybody is. For example, having an internal wiki where we can have a directory of members that people can access and a calendar of meetings. So the special interest groups that we're going to talk about later this afternoon, being able to easily see who's involved, what are they doing, when are they meeting, how can I join up, all these things, making it easy for everyone to get that information. Thank you.
Thanks, Deanne. So room 4 was Felix, Lavinia, Rianne, Stephen,
Yeah. I've self-nominated to give feedback. That doesn't surprise those of you who know me, I know. So we spoke about the stakeholders and the UKRN's a means of reaching out to for those stakeholder organisations to be able to reach out to a bunch of institutions that they might not have otherwise been able to reach. So actually facilitating their mission is one of the benefits of the UKRN. And also added to that, the sort of signalling of the virtues of open research and the EDI, etc. That should not be underestimated, especially with what's going on across the world, America being an example. The fact that people can see that these are things that we value and progressing is a powerful thing. And similarly, as Marcus was speaking at the start about also that international support and getting people set up as well. So I think that our stakeholders and the brevity of them and the importance of what we do for them shouldn't be underestimated. And similarly, I guess they come in stakeholders, but they also go into every other category as well, is the integration of libraries. I promise this wasn't me being entirely leading. There was a general consensus amongst the group that having that integration, having sort of organically grown with, especially with the open research program, with some of our, or quite a lot of our authors being embedded into libraries, that's enabled that cross-fertilization and sharing, which has been very beneficial. We had quite a few new members within the group. So we noted that the handbook and guidance has been really good for onboarding people and supporting people, and that it's enabled us all to grow networks and communities within our institutions. I noted the fact that not just have we got the local network, but we've got a little group of me and my Orca Louise and our local network lead Christian, who, you know, we get together and we make initiatives and we're collaborating in a way that we might otherwise not have done, and that gives us more resource and power within the institution. So it's that community building within as well. And also one thing that was said about a new member of staff or a new member joining us was that they had nothing bad to say, and I've underlined that because to me that actually says that we're not dysfunctional. There's actually something going on. There's some coordination and organization going on, and people aren't coming in and joining us and thinking, well, this is terrible. So I think that that's a real positive.
If you're looking for a tagline, maybe it should just be not dysfunctional.
Absolutely. Branding.
Thanks, Stephen. So the next room was Al in room 5 with Elliot, Miles, Tom. Oh, and Marcus as well.
Sorry. Yes, so there would seem to be real benefit in kind of a multi-pronged approach. So it's not just collaboration or coordination, but also convening different organisations in the sector. There's value in advising institutions on kind of tracking the impact of changes in open research policies and see how that buy-in is actually being deployed through the institution and providing evidence that the policies are working. A key value was seen in the kind of activist focus, and UKRN makes stuff happen. There was a perception, a lot of our people in our group were institutional leads, so there's a perception that university leadership is actually so busy that they're really grateful that they can delegate these kind of things to a designated person who works with UKRN. There's a sort of role in supporting organisations with succession planning in those roles, so briefings, helping preserve information, documenting things and having the correct data. From the funder perspective, I think the quote was an expert and representative of the research community. So the research community actually talking to each other and developing what good looks like, but also building on a consensus on what's achievable. And that's not necessarily, other organisations aren't necessarily best placed to do that. The institutional leads agreed, and you know, it's not just about making a change, but also having a say in that change. It being part of UKRN helps promote the individuals as well as the institutions who are engaging in best practice. There was a feeling that you know, lots of institutions have recognised that, for example, journal impact factors might not be the best way to measure quality, but there can be a bit of a void of, well, what do we do to demonstrate that in the absence? And UKRN steps into that place. It's not just the documents and the primers that, you know, we share freely, but also the knowledge behind them and having access to people that you can ask. So there was optimism about the value even when everything is open access. We talked about accreditation and whether UKRN could have a role in that, but it was felt that there's a sort of signalling value of just being part of UKRN shows you're a more rigorous institution. And then in the financial crisis, the point was made that the mission's more important than ever. While management might be, you know, focusing on short-term things like student recruitment, it will take us much longer to realise the impact on pulling funding for research culture, open access, that kind of thing. So yes, this is a difficult time, but a key time.
Great, thanks, Al. So room 6 was Nadia, Nicola, Danny, Will.
Yeah, I will hopefully sum up from our group. Across the board, we felt like the value propositions that were on the slides really did resonate, and a good representation. For local network leads, we would add that UKRN has helped local network leads to be visible within their institutions, potentially created extra or new opportunities for them to be able to leverage and influence within their institutions. With that there are sort of challenges, and speaking about challenges and barriers, you know, it's been echoing what's already been said. Some of the financial challenges across the institutions have led to maybe different priorities, and there is a difference depending upon the research area you're in as to what the value is of the UKRN, particularly for those perhaps in arts and humanities. So there's a question of how do we make the case for reproducibility to speak more to some of the areas where this isn't as pertinent. And so then with that, could the UKRN perhaps consider how we could further advocate for the time and value of local network leads, which in of itself would be a value proposition for them. And then if we consider that REF is a lever, and that local network leads could then have greater recognition within their institutions, as they're likely to be able to contribute considerably to some of those activities, could the UKRN support local network leads and potentially institutional leads to access and influence REF working groups? For the institutional leads, and this actually might speak across all of those key groups, perhaps another value proposition is that the UKRN helps with advocacy, the linking of funders, publishers, other key groups like Open Science Framework, for example, creates the opportunity to be more inclusive and influence, you know, changes in policy or new policies for a much broader perspective for open research. And then similarly for stakeholders, that we sort of discussed that at the SIGs are probably going to be a good way for a good mechanism for this, of just ensuring that all of these groups are able to come together. But we need to maybe consider the mechanisms for the stakeholders to be able to see the value. We talked about actually there's probably a lot of ways in which the UKRN have probably facilitated really important and key meetings of groups coming together, but these are probably not recognised, or so maybe it's more case studies and feedback loops to use that as part of the value proposition. And that's all from our group.
Great, thanks, Nadia. So room 7 was Claire, Karen, Etienne, Crispin.
Sorry, bit of a runaway mouse there. So the things that were discussed was how can we make ourselves really important to universities? And then the idea of talking about training being key was discussed. And it was felt that whilst UKRN has done an amazing job on resourcing training, the delivery could be improved, as many universities already have their own training. So we want to avoid duplication of effort. But what we can offer is people power, and we can offer the training without extra cost. And for some courses, the uptake of UKRN training has been so low that they were cancelled, and deadlines for the training registration were considered a bit short, which was creating a bit of stress by the time it was discussed who's doing the training and then signing up to it. So it was thought that UKRN courses need to be quite different to the courses already run at other universities, and ensure that our training offering is better. It was also a bit of a barrier in that some PhDs feel that they don't need more training. And it was considered that it could be an interesting exercise to look at what are the qualities of institutions that are successful in securing funding. And we could contact the ERC and ask for their data and other data, and then UKRN can become expert in knowing that and bringing this expertise back to universities. And it would be an interesting exercise to look at research culture surveys, because it's noted that there are substantially different experiences and different cultures across different universities. Some very large universities people don't really communicate, and people are quite isolated. So even though there are a lot of people, the collaboration could be improved. So that's it, folks.
Fab, thanks, Claire. And then the final room 8 was Eleonora, Nicola, Jackie.
I'm happy to feedback if my microphone is working.
All good.
So we had a really good mix in our group of stakeholders, members of the LNL and institutional representatives. And the joy of going last means that we talked about a lot of the things that you've already mentioned. So, for example, the role of the libraries that Stephen mentioned as a coordinating force, and how LLMs really help with visibility within institutions that Nadia mentioned. So there are a lot of common themes. There were 3 elements that I just wanted to cover here to summarize what we discussed. Is the importance of community in terms of the value of community, knowing that people are not alone. This was particularly for LNLs, and that they were part of a community and they could share best practice and ideas across and with each other. And I think that also came across for institutional leads, and we've talked about that before, the importance of community. Also, that there are lots of communities that are focused on a single issue, but the value that UKRN brings is that it creates linkages across those and across the entire research cycle. So it's not simply a focused way of thinking, it brings together lots of different strands, including stakeholders, together into one place. So you get a much broader view of things. And actually that's really important for culture change, because you can't change culture without changing the system, and you can't change a system unless you align everything. So the importance of that kind of cross-cutting wider view in terms of culture change is one of the places that UKRN really makes a significant difference and is incredibly valuable as what it does in terms of creating community and creating linkages. And we talked a lot about how difficult that is you need a sort of a bedrock of relationships, and that's why it's quite hard, because it is in early days in terms of building relationships and mutual trust. But one of the ways we do that, which is my point 3, is through shared projects, and that so it's opportunities to collaborate in service of shared objectives, which I thought was a really nice phrase that sort of summed up a lot of what we've tried to do. But what the value that we bring to being able to bring a lot of people round the table to work objectively on a project that they might not have worked on otherwise. So bringing stakeholders together so they can hear different views within stakeholders, with institutions and with others. And the indicator pilots was mentioned as a really good example of that, of how we're bringing lots of people together and enabling change in a much wider way, because we're not focused on one set of people or groups, but it's much broader. Yeah, so that's the power of working together across institutions and stakeholders through sticks, through carrots, not through a ref stick.
Amazing. That was the last group, wasn't it? Thank you so much. That was an amazing set of conversations. We will be capturing those. We haven't had a conversation in the office yet about who's going to be writing those up, but I suspect Dolly and I will have that conversation over the next few days. But we will, and we will share that with you, and it will be amazingly important for us developing our sustainability model, which will be, you know, how we work together into the future. We're coming up to lunchtime. Were there any final reflections on that session before I close us off for lunch?
And just to say thank you to all of the note takers. Obviously, all of those notes will be collated and feed back into this process. That's been hugely appreciated. And apologies if a couple of you felt on the spot in terms of having to report back, but I think we navigated that well enough. And as Neil says, I think we can probably wrap up there and be back in slightly over 1 hour at 1:30 UK time. It's 12:30 now, so a solid 1 hour for lunch. Thank you all. So welcome back. The next section is on special interest groups. Neil, we have 15 minutes to introduce special interest groups and potential special interest groups, say what they are, which ones we've already established, what other ones we might want to do. It's not clear to me from the agenda who's meant to be opening this session before we break into parallel groups.
Somebody needs to introduce each of the chairs of the special interest groups or proto special interest groups. That could be you or could be me, I don't mind.
I don't have that in front of me, so if that could be you, that would be helpful. If you could take us through the list.
Okay, I'll do my best from memory, although I might need to check up. But let's start. Etienne, now are you doing one or two special interest groups, Etienne?
Just one. Lisa kindly stepped in and she's going to do the computational reproducibility.
Okay, can we start with the meta research one then?
But Neil, before we do, do you just want to say a little bit about what special interest groups are, because that may not be familiar to everybody?
Yes, thanks, Marcus. So this is something that we've talked about and has been, in the making in some ways for 1 or 2 years now. There've been informal groups that have come together within the UKRN community because they've got particular interest in a particular topic. I know there's been some people, the qualitative research, for example, there's been people with an interest in that who have come together at various places, and one of the things they've done is to produce a primer, which you may have seen recently, on open research in the qualitative context. But we thought that it was timely perhaps now to put those on a more formal footing, or at least a more recognised footing. And so you'll have seen in the revised terms of reference that special interest groups are mentioned, and we are, I guess, trying out for the next year or so what a special interest group is, and there'll be various models for how they work, and we will see which of those work well and which of them don't, and we'll learn through this year, and possibly put things on a sort of former and more defined footing in the next round of the revisions to the terms of reference. But they're really an opportunity for people to come together to collaborate on a topic of interest, perhaps look for funding opportunities, perhaps look for opportunities to develop resources, or to develop other kinds of collaborations. So with that in mind, Etienne, do you want to kick us off with the meta research special interest group?
Yes, so UKRN has a lot of, we've had a lot of effort and activities on the topics of meta research, which seems to be a very strong focus in many circles from the funders, the institutions, and so on. And and so, yeah, it just made sense that we coalesced our effort within UKRN.
That's great. Thanks, Etienne. Do you want to say a little bit about what's happened so far?
Yes, so I can do that. I don't know how much time do I have?
A minute or so.
Right, okay. So we have had several projects funded by several institutions, with most of them finishing soonish. There is also a bit more bigger projects, bigger scales in the UK generally. There is a Research on Research Institute. There is a meta science conference in UCL in June. And within UKRN, we've just had a meeting on Tuesday, and I will say a few things about that during our get together. And we're identifying the different activities that we could be doing together.
Amazing, thanks, Etienne. So I should have said at the start, the reason for going through the special interest groups is we will, after we've had an introduction to each of them, break out into groups where you've got a choice to join discussion around one of those special interest groups. So please listen to the introductions with a view to making that choice when we come to that point. Lisa, do you want to talk about the computational reproducibility one?
Sure. All right, so Etienne leads our group, but I'm second in charge today, I guess. It's a group of 9 of us who've been meeting about every week for 30 minutes for the last year. It's our 1-year anniversary. We've been exchanging knowledge and best practice around computational reproducibility, but our main activity is working on a primer. So a very basic introduction to computational reproducibility, but there's a ton of other work to do and interesting things to coordinate. You can read what I put in the chat, and we're going to go through that in our breakout bit and brainstorm different actions a bigger group could do.
Amazing, thanks Lisa. And yes, but both of those groups have now got really quite a lot of members, so it's quite exciting to think about what that now makes possible. Now, we're going to have an introduction to an arts research special interest group or potential special interest group. Now, Corinne was going to introduce that, but she's not well. But I think Dawn and Henry, I think that's you today.
That's absolutely fine. We're both here. Don't know if Dawn was having some issues with her mouse. I don't know if you're in now, Dawn.
Yeah, I'm here.
Super. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Dawn Woolley, a research fellow at Leeds Arts University, and Henry, Corinne and I are going to kind of co-lead the special interest group about arts-based research. Through our conversations with Corinne, we've kind of discovered quite specific issues that come from having quite unorthodox sort of data, essentially, in terms of reproducibility. And we're a small specialist art school who are fairly new as a research culture. So we are really keen to learn from how other people do it and share best practices of how we make our data open access, for example. Yeah, and we're just really keen to learn from others what they do and find good methods that we can share.
Yeah, and address all sorts of common issues and opportunities in open research in the arts. Yeah.
Sounds really exciting, and I think the learning will be in many directions as well. I think there's lots of transparency practices in arts research that others would be, others could pay attention to around positionality, for example. So, yeah, very excited about that. Thank you to Dawn and to Henry. Marcus, do you want to introduce the gamification and games-based approaches group?
Sure, and in fact, this will be about game-based approaches, not gamification. The distinction is that gamification is the addition of game-like features to something that you would do anyway, and I use the example of apps that give kids points for brushing their teeth. That's the addition of game-like features to teeth brushing. Game-based learning is different. That is the creation of games that are fun and engaging to play in their own right, but through playing them, you learn knowledge or a skill. And there are, in fact, a lot of game-based approaches to open research out there already, many of which have been developed by individuals or individual groups in their own time. There are escape rooms and Cards Against Humanity games and choose your own adventure games on different aspects of open research, like data sharing, for example, and other things as well beyond that. But obviously, open research is one of the main areas of UKRN's focus. So David Smales has been helping to bring together people who are interested in these game-based approaches that could complement, for example, the training that's happening across the open research program. The idea is that the first step will be simply to see who is interested in these approaches and being part of a special interest group that could explore what we as UKRN could do in that space. The second step would probably be to scope what is already out there, because there is a great deal that's already in place. And Valerie McCutcheon at Glasgow is working with people, I think, at Robert Gordon University, who've developed a spreadsheet that tries to capture as many of these existing resources as possible. And then if there is interest in taking it further, we might look at, for example, a funding application to develop a few of what we think are perhaps the best of those that are currently available into well-produced games that have, all of the design elements that cost a bit of money to implement added to them, together with an evaluation of whether or not they have a positive impact on learning outcomes, because there is evidence in other contexts that these game-based approaches do actually improve learning outcomes. So that's where we are at the moment. It's still very much at an early stage, probably the last of the special interest groups to convene, but potentially an area that people will be interested in.
Thanks very much, Marcus. So the next one, Harv, do you want to introduce the sharing protocols and methods one?
Hi there. So my name's Harv. I'm from an organisation called the Only Good Antibodies Community, and we try and address quite a specific biomedical problem that sits inside a much bigger issue. And the idea of this group actually came out of a meeting in Bristol of the stakeholder group, where I think Emma from Protocols.io said, there are data availability statements, and that gradually led to increased methods and norms around sharing data, but we're not really there with methods and materials. So I'm going to call it the Methods and Materials Special Interest Group. And this is my pitch to get people interested, as opposed to this is not a well-established group yet. So we were there, that was the start point. Our mission would be to improve the sharing of usable methods and materials by making them more feasible, easy, normative, rewarded. And for now, what that looks like is connecting and mapping existing initiatives. And the initiatives that were in the room on that day included the NC3Rs. They have an experimental design tool, Octopus. In the room is RRIDs, which is an example of a way of sharing research resources that is relatively broad. There was interest from the British Neuroscience Association, PLOS, as well as a number of others in that group. For now, our aims are to achieve that objective by connecting and mapping existing initiatives and to define some gaps to see if there are, for example, activities that we might collaboratively pursue funding opportunities for. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Harv. And the final, last but not least, Huai, I think you're going to introduce the Qualitative Research Special Interest Group.
Is Hawaii here? Otherwise, oh yes, good, excellent. Hawaii, off you go.
Hello. Hi folks. Yeah, so Natasha and I got together to discuss a little bit around the Qualitative Special Interest Group. And we thought it'd be a wonderful opportunity here to have a go at gathering colleagues together to think about how we could both open up parts of the qualitative research process, project materials and so on, as well as enhancing the existing projects and agendas that are in place. So, for example, enhancing existing metadata in context of its generation, or enhancing openness to participatory research efforts. For this particular group, our pitch is to Suggest to colleagues we'd like to try and build a community of practice, maybe share some experiences, contribute knowledge, the usual kind of knowledge sharing with each other, share best practice and suggest various topics for actions to take forwards. This would include perhaps sharing resources as well as developing and funding proposals to help fund change in the area. And so we'd very much welcome you to participate if you're interested in, the idea of qualitative open research. What does it mean, and what could it mean in the future? It'd be wonderful to have you join us. And at the moment, we've got a lot of disciplinary diversity, I think, across the network. So valued insights from colleagues from all parts of academia, I think.
Fantastic, thank you. And if anything, from that run through of these special interest groups, it just highlights the range of interests and disciplines and research fields and methods that are represented here, which is just so exciting. Right, so you now have an opportunity to decide what conversation you want to have for the next half an hour. Dolly, you've got a poll that's going to help us decide. So when you vote, so the room is that you will be taken to. How are we doing, Dolly? We've got 48 people in the room.
We've got 35 replies so far.
Of course, you don't have to join a group, but there's not much going to be going on in the main room in the meantime. Okay, I suggest, Dolly, if you could take us to the breakout groups, and should we come back in half an hour for a quick feedback session? Welcome back, everyone. As ever, we could have kept talking for a long time. I hope that's been the case in the other special interest groups. We've got time for really, really short feedback, so like half the length of the last piece of feedback this morning. We aim to finish by 2:30. So, Etienne, meta research.
Yes, so everybody was pretty interested. There were actually quite only few people who attended the session on Tuesday, so it was a good opportunity to recap and discuss the scope of and opportunities within the special interest groups. We spoke a lot about how we could use meta research to understand what makes for a good research culture and how that links to grant success or things like that. We strongly feel that there will be a correlation with the number of cookies being consumed in a department. And we also discussed what was in it for various groups of people, such as publishers and so on. So Ed, who is representing Springer Nature, came to talk to us, and so that was quite interesting. And we basically want to support the community to do better work. So that's the scope of meta research.
That's great. Very exciting. Thanks, Etienne. Any questions for Etienne? Because I realised you could only join one group, and you might have wanted to be in that one, but joined another one.
Just to say, Neil, there was a second meta research group as well.
Oh, was there?
So,
oh, that
yes,
explains why there were only so few people. Great.
So who was in the second meta research group?
Yeah, so the second room was Ian, Jackie, Olavo, Penn, and Tom.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Let's hear from them.
Yes.
Well, I joined a bit late, but I think a few of us did. So if anyone else wants to pipe up and talk, you're very, very welcome to. Just cut across me. But I think basically we kind of had a chat about what maybe meta research ought to look like overall, and where we might want to focus efforts, and including bringing up some points that sometimes we may want to focus on kind of the harder problems that are more difficult to define and measure, but might be more worthwhile. For instance, kind of looking at like impacts and looking at finding interventions that did work, not just pointing out the ones that didn't, not just pointing out the problems. That was mostly from Ian. That was the last thing we discussed. Any other thoughts from our group? Yeah, it was a nice chat.
Anybody who wasn't in either of the meta research groups got anything they want to reflect back into that? Lots of opportunities to do so. There'll be more meetings of that group, obviously.
We could have randomized those two groups and we could have had meta research.
Oh, Mark.
There was definitely a bias. I think my group was much more beginners and the other ones were pretty advanced.
Okay, computational reproducibility, Lisa.
Yep. Okay. We had a really small group, but good discussion. And anybody else who's interested, there's a link to sign up to the mailing list that's in the the brainstorming doc, which I'll put in the chat again. All right. So we talked a bit about how the primer that we're working on right now is by necessity in the style of UKRN primers it's a primer. There's not a lot of detail in it. And advice, it just explains what are the major concepts and points people to sources for further learning. So there's scope for developing more resources on kind of both ends. We talked about, is it worthwhile making a computational reproducibility primer for people who refuse to give up their point and click workflows, perhaps explaining to them how onerous that is and encouraging them to code through having to go through a terrible documentation process, and then doing more advanced things. Or we talked a bit about Sortie, what they're doing, and other organizations that are tackling computational reproducibility. What can we bring in of resources that they've already created? So you can look at the document for more details on all that.
Amazing. Thanks, Lisa. Any reactions to that on computational reproducibility? Oh, great. Very exciting. Thank you for that. Dawn or Henry, arts research?
We had a very nice small group, very nice discussion with everybody, predominantly around the language of research and how it can lead to some misunderstanding for arts researchers that their work isn't research and some uncertainty from them. But we kind of reiterated that any research from any research discipline area is genuine, as long as it's a process of investigation leading to new insights which are effectively shared. We talked a bit about repositories and the ways in which arts research outputs are represented on repositories, and creating repositories which appeal to arts researchers, which are more visual, and ways of dealing with data from interdisciplinary research projects where there is qual, quant, and arts-based data in one project, and how to represent that in a coherent manner. Don't know if Dawn's got anything else to add?
No, I think that was pretty pretty comprehensive, Henry. A bit of a discussion about how the kind of STEM focused language and structures can create problems for arts-based researchers, and also some ways that the people in the group are overcoming it.
Definitely. And if anyone's interested in joining the SIG, we've got our first meeting on the 10th of April, I believe.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Dawn. Thanks, Henry. Which reminds me, if you are interested in joining any of these special interest groups, some of them have got links in the chat. Otherwise, I suggest either you contact the person who's speaking, in that case Dawn and Henry, or contact UKRN-admin@bristol.ac.uk, and we'll point you in the right direction. Marcus, game-based approaches.
So we talked a lot about how much interest there is in game-based approaches, how many games have been developed around research practices in general and open research in particular, and how the UKRN structure through local networks, through reproducibility journal clubs, through orcas and the communities of trainers that exist at participating institutions all could be conduits for using these games, that we need to collate what's out there, do a bit of a scoping exercise, potentially identify some gaps. But perhaps the key thing that we identified is that almost by definition, who are part of a special interest group will be especially interested in whatever that group's about. And in the context of games, there are some people who will, happily play a week-long game with incredibly complex rules because they're really into that kind of thing. But the kind of person that we're trying to reach is probably not that kind of person. It would need to be a game that you can do, that is simple, that you can learn quickly, that you can complete in half an hour or 45 minutes, the kind of length of time that an average seminar would last for example. So as we explore the potential of game-based approaches, we need to make sure that we're speaking to those communities that we think might like to engage in these game-based approaches, to get a spec from them that we can then use to kind of constrain what we develop, so that it's designed with the end user in mind, effectively.
Yeah, so much potential there, isn't there? Thank you, Marcus. Any feedback on what you've heard from Marcus? Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. I think, Harv, well, it was sharing protocols, but I'm not sharing what?
Yeah,
Was one of the
perfect.
questions.
We kind of became more and more ambitious as time went on, and it was in part because we talked about some of the models supplied by Octopus and Lifecycle, and I'm really sorry if I haven't mentioned all of them. In terms of PubMed Central, in terms of linking the manuscript with data and methods and resources, and effectively, we know that data availability statements are not necessarily achieving their objective, and yet we think that they should probably be called data, methods, and resources availability, and I've probably nonetheless missed stuff out. In terms of a hard action list afterwards, we identified pockets of excellent practice. ASAP is an initiative that really promotes excellent practice here, and what we wanted to do was link them with other important stakeholders with an interest here in the UK, and to pick up from where an initiative called ProMap left off, and to try and bring in somebody from Love Methods. So we sort of did a mapping exercise, identified some important stakeholders, and elevated our ambition to try and stick together data, methods, and resources. Perhaps that's too big, but I think it's exciting.
Absolutely. Thanks, Harv. Comments on Harv and the sharing things, stuff in the technical sense of the word, obviously. Okay, not last but not least, Wai, the qualitative.
So we had a small but productive group which met together to first introduce ourselves, and we have quite a bit of diversity in our group actually. So both with colleagues working just with qualitative methods, as well as others who are more interested in mixed methods and approaching from more of a cognitive science perspective and like brain imaging and that sort of thing. So I think that took a little while for us to just properly introduce ourselves and our background and see how we can work together going forwards. We've talked about the format of our kind of subsequent meetings that we might arrange, and we converged, I think, on perhaps a quarterly kind of arrangement. That's where we left things at the end of the group. In terms of what people are interested in, we very much like to run this group as co-produce sort of group, and our colleagues mentioned, for example, things in like clinical areas or clinical facing areas to do with technology, where some of this open practice might find root and take hold a little bit to help streamline existing practice in the area. That's one kind of area we've talked about. Also, just let me look at my notes. Yeah, there's like also a topic around like consent, data consent and existing process in that area, and how we might open up and perhaps enhance some of the existing good work that goes on in the area along the lines of the primer on qualitative research from UKRN. So that was the bulk of our discussions today, and we're very much looking forward to collaborating further in the future with each other and with yourselves and the wider group.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to that too. Any feedback or reflections to Huai on the qualitative? Okay, conscious of time. I guess there are two possible things you might be thinking about. One is which of the other SIGs shall I join? And thanks very much, Heike, to your suggestion. We'll make that clear how you do that and send that round to all UKRN members. And the other is what happens if there's a SIG I want to set up that doesn't exist. We've got 6, which feels like quite a lot to be working with for the first year to see how they work. Obviously, get in touch with us if you've got an idea and you really want to champion it. But I would have to say, I think we're a little bit nervous about going over 6 at the moment. But let's have that conversation if we need to. It's 2:30. I suggest we take a 10-minute break and then we come back for one of the highlights, I think, of the annual meeting, which is the Dorothy Bishop Prize.
So welcome back, everybody. We'll move on to the next agenda item. I appreciate it's been a long day. Thank you to those of you that have been here for the duration. As Neil mentioned at the end of the last session, this is one of the highlights of the annual meeting, the award of the Dorothy Bishop Prize. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks at the beginning of the day, Dorothy Bishop was one of those people who was absolutely instrumental in the origins of UK Reducibility Network, chaired our advisory board as it was for that initial period when we were setting ourselves up, continues to be a staunch ally of what we're trying to do. And so it was fitting that the prize that we set up to recognise the efforts of researchers and research enablers in that grassroots community that forms our foundation should be named after her. And we have refined the prize and the rules of the prize year on year, and we continue to do so. Every year we learn things that we could do differently or better. But one of the things that we ask our International Advisory Committee to do is to set up a small task force to review the applications that we receive for the Dorothy Bishop Prize, to provide a degree of independence between the UKRN community and given that the people who apply for the prize typically come from within that community, and the decision-making process when it comes to who should be awarded the prize. But the prize is really to recognise the efforts that individuals are making at that grassroots level to drive forward the agenda that UKRN champions to improve the transparency and the quality of research produced by the UK system and beyond. So I'm very grateful that we've been joined by Anna Scheel, the chair of the International Advisory Committee, who also led that task force to evaluate the Dorothy Bishop Prize applications. She can say a little bit more about the process and also tell us who the winners are from the shortlist of nominees that we felt were most competitive, or the task force felt were most competitive. So Anna, thank you again for joining us, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Marcus. This is a great honor. I have to say it's my first time actually presenting the award, but it's an award very close to my heart. So I've been lucky enough to be part of this endeavor from the beginning of the UKRN, and we, I think the International Advisory Committee was also, I think, very much in favor of setting up such an award in order to not only celebrate the achievements of early career researchers in this field of open scholarship and reproducibility, but also to make a little contribution in maybe, giving people a leg up who are really investing in these things, maybe not always in line with their with career incentives, so to speak. So promoting open science, helping others to adopt open practices, and those things are unfortunately not always recognized and incentivized in our standard system. And so there are junior researchers who do this using time that they might also spend on other things that might make their CVs look better, on more
standard parameters. And so in order to start to change the incentive structure, essentially, or start to change the incentives, this award is meant to highlight those contributions, and especially those of researchers who have not yet received the recognition that their contributions deserve. And so that is our goal with this award. Another point maybe to take into account is that early career researchers is, of course, quite a flexible term. It can mean very different things, from maybe a PhD student to a postdoc who's several years past their PhD. And so one thing we also try in the Dorothy Bishop Prize Task Force is to take opportunity into account. So this year, also in the previous years, but this year in a more principled way, we took academic age of the candidates into account when evaluating their contributions, and hope that that we roughly succeeded in doing that. Okay, so I will share I have a couple of slides that I will that I hope I can present. One moment, I have to find the right window. Where is it? Gosh, this is sorry. Yeah, here we are. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I hope this works. So we had this year, we received nominations for 19 candidates. I was going to read them read them all out. We will. They were all had very interesting contributions to offer. So it was a tough job for us. So nominated were Reni Baikova, Sasha Benjamin, Michael Biddle, Edward Byrne, Anthony English, Beatrice Gulau, Mark A. Hansen, Sarah Villa Hernandez, David Hohenschurz-Schmidt, Maxime Levasseur, Louis Jones, André Meyer-Chagas, Samuel Moore, Shiba Patak, Anaya Prosser, Mario Grania Taborelli, excuse me, Angelos Theokaris, Onodoro Townsend, and Sarah Rahimtullah. Sorry for butchering any of these names. Now, what I enjoyed particularly about this year was that the disciplines that these candidates came from were maybe more diverse than ever before, although this diversity has been increasing year on year. So we actually also similarly had 19 disciplines that these candidates were associated with. So from anthropology, criminology, immunology, epidemiology, what else? Paleontology, neuroscience, social sciences, environmental humanities, digital humanities, medical statistics. So really very, very diverse. It was really interesting to read all these contributions in those different areas. This is also one thing we've been trying in the task force, is that to take into account what impact the candidates make in their own discipline, because obviously disciplines vary in their recognition of open research, open scholarship, and in how much there is already going on. So my own background is in psychology. I can say that psychology, in psychology, open science has received a lot of attention in the last years, which is a really good thing. But it also means that the environment has changed there. And there's, of course, some other disciplines where this is not the case at all. And people who invest their time in trying to affect change really face a much bigger challenge, perhaps, but also receive less support for it. All right. And so with this, let's move on to the shortlist. So from this really impressive list of candidates, we narrowed it down to 6 candidates, which are Sasha Benjamin, Michael Biddle, André Meyer-Chagas, Louis Jones, Anaya Prosser, and Sarah Rahimtullah. I'm going to give a very brief overview of their contributions. For that, I'm going to I have to stop screen sharing for a second, because I have only one screen available right now. So I have to find my notes. Apologies for that. So we have Sasha Benjamin, who is a research fellow in the Surrey Morphology Group, which is linguists, researching complex words in human language, and particularly Sasha is studying inflectional systems using computational models. Sasha has been nominated for his contribution in documenting the world's languages in interoperable ways. So in particular, he has initiated the formation of a set of standards in order to basically to document languages in interoperable ways. He himself has contributed to this also by actually salvaging endangered linguist data sets. So standardizing data sets and releasing it openly in a structured way. He has created a new standard for morphological lexicons called Parallex, which enforces conventions favoring interoperability and reusability while providing scientific flexibility, and using open source tools to facilitate data curation and generate interactive websites at no cost. And this new standard is already being used now for more data sets. Sasha has also been teaching relevant skills to other early career researchers. Okay, I should in order to move on, the next candidate on the shortlist is Michael Biddle. Michael is a postdoc at the University of Leicester in the Department of Respiratory Sciences. Michael has the contribution he was nominated for, among other things, the co-founding of the Only Good Antibodies community, which has the missions to make better practices in research antibody choice and antibody use more feasible and more easy and rewarded. He's also run the UK lab for a science collaboration with industry that's called Antibody Characterization Through Open Science, and contributed to sharing open protocols that are endorsed by academia and industry, and also leads a project helping other research groups making their research more reliable, and also participating in Train the Trainer initiatives supported by the UKRN. Okay, the next on the list, Michael Lewis. One second. Sorry, Michael Lewis Jones, excuse me, got lost in my notes. Lewis Jones is an NERC independent research fellow at the Department of Earth Sciences at the University College London. He's a computational paleobiologist studying macroecological and macroevolutionary history of reef-building organisms. And Lewis has been nominated, among other things, for setting up, or chiefly for setting up the Paleoverse, which is an initiative made up of early career researchers around the globe to form a paleobiology community that shares open access tools and resources that establish standards and improve reproducibility in analytical paleobiological research. And the Paleoverse has apparently been quite successful to this point and has, among other things, led to the development of several R packages that support reproducibility and transparency in the field. It also hosts an open science lecture series to spread these achievements and foster open science practices. The next on our list is André Meyer-Chagat. André is a okay, here I am. André is a scientific officer in open science and bioengineering, and works in open source hardware. I must admit that this was for me the first time that I was that I learned about the term open science hardware. I did not realize that this existed. So as one might imagine, open science hardware is about developing hardware tools that are easy, cheap to make. So with that make these tools much more widely accessible to more researchers. And Andre has, amongst other things, developed an ultra low cost fluorescent microscope for under $100. Has also and an open source visual stimulator capable of using any color LEDs for vision research and color research. And has also tried to make the case for an academic adoption of open source open source hardware. Sorry. He has also designed and provided training and teaching others through collaborations with Trend Africa, and has started Open Neuroscience, which is a user-curated database and a central hub for open source neuroscience projects. All right, then we have two left on the list. The next candidate is Anaya Prosser. Anaya is a lecturer in marketing, business, and society at in the University of Bath School of Management, and studies and does research on how individuals and groups respond to crises. Anaya has been nominated for work in particular concerning the role of open scholarship, open data for qualitative research, which I also think is an important and under-resourced area. So she has done research showing that open data policies usually don't mention qualitative research at all, but also that some standards for open data or certain open data requirements are not very don't fit for qualitative data very well, and has worked to changing that. So has worked to progress the discussion on open research and qualitative management scholarship, and to resolve discussions, deadlocks in that, also in that community, and different editorial positions. Has worked towards open research and qualitative and transparency for qualitative research, also worked on bringing advice to bringing open research to nonprofit scholarship, and developed a step-by-step guide to open qualitative research in evidence-based medicine. Okay, and then we have the last but not least, Sarah Rahimtullah is a research fellow in the Department of Sports Science at Nottingham Trent University. Sarah uses co-design methods to develop electronic textiles for healthcare and well-being, and so works with wearable technology. Sarah has used multimodal and participatory research in multidisciplinary methods to bridge the gap between technology and design. She has established a community of open research practice at the School of Art and Design and Advanced Textiles Research Group, and helps onboarding with incoming postgraduate researchers to help them adopt open practices, especially strategies for ethical and responsible data sharing, and is now also developing systems that promote research rigor and research integrity in her current department, and has delivered training to a lot of students, and given and also she promoted these views in her community. Okay, so with that, we can progress to the perhaps most exciting part here. Let me get back to my Yes, okay, so now the exciting part. We have from this list of candidates, we have determined, or not we, I should say, the supervisory board of the UKRN has determined 3 winners, who each will receive a little Doska, which you can see here, a little Lego figure of Dorothy Bishop, and perhaps a slightly more tangible £500 voucher. And the 3 winners are the first, Michael Biddle, Anaya Prosser, and Lewis Jones. Congratulations, really well done. Also, of course, to the others on the shortlist. This was really a tough call. We found it very difficult to make a decision. Your contributions have all been, very, very appreciated. I would very much like to invite all 3 winners to perhaps say something if they like to. So maybe first of all, is Michael Biddle here in the audience and would maybe like to say a few words?
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's really means something to get this award because, as you mentioned earlier, to go, to care about reproducibility and open, research, etc., is a lot of hard work, which isn't necessarily appreciated heavily due to the academic infrastructure what's, currently we have. But yeah, it really means a lot, and I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and again, congratulations. Is Lewis Jones here and would like to say something?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm kind of lost for words. Very shocked. Thank you very much for this. It's really nice to be nominated and awarded for this. It really does mean a lot to me. Yeah, I'd just like to say, with all these things, though, it's never just down to one person. At least with us over at Paleoverse, we have a really strong community which is pushing this forward. And although, I've kind of been leading this in some ways, I wouldn't have been able to achieve like a lot of the stuff we've achieved without this great team we have. So I think the future is bright for open science and reproducibility. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what comes next. Thank you.
Yeah, well, good. Best of luck with that, of course. Thank you. And the last one, Anaya Prosser, are you here? And would you like to say some words?
Yes, hello, can you hear me? I'm on the side of the road, so the audio might not be great, but I am, absolutely gobsmacked and just honoured. Thank you so much to UKRN for this recognition. Congratulations to all the other winners and everyone that's shortlisted. It's really great to know that we're not the only ones doing this work. It can feel very isolating, and I'm really grateful to everyone I know and all of my collaborators that have made space for qualitative research in these discussions, because it hasn't been easy and it's required a lot of humility and a lot of help along the way. So yeah, this is absolutely what I said. So thank you very much, Karen.
Yes, yeah, congratulations again, and thank you all to the 3 of you. I obviously completely understand that these achievements are group efforts. I do hope that your collaborators can share a bit of reflected glory and share a bit of this prize as well. I think it is an ongoing issue of how to reward community efforts as well. So for now we have this individual award, but yeah, the other people involved are obviously also included in this award. Okay, with that, well, thank you very much. This was a real pleasure. Then Marcus, back to you.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for joining us. I know that you need to leave soon, so please do feel free to jump off when you need to, but we really appreciate you joining us for this. Congratulations to the winners. Congratulations to those that were shortlisted. Congratulations to those that were nominated. Obviously, we, much as we would like to and much as it would be deserved, can't give prizes to everybody, but I think even the act of being nominated says something about the quality, the value of the work that you're all doing. All the more so if you ended up being shortlisted, but as Anna said, that was a very difficult decision to have to make because of the quality of all of the nominations, and then to then win is another kind of level of recognition, but again, one that entailed some very difficult decisions given the quality of what we saw in front of us, or what the task force saw in front of them. So it's great that there's so much activity going on. Hopefully this prize continues to be a way to surface that, recognize it, applaud it, and reward it where that's possible. So I hope people can make something of the fact that they were nominated, shortlisted, and or winners. And hopefully we can continue to refine the prize as we go forward, and use it in the way that it's intended to amplify and support those that are doing all of that great work at the grassroots to improve. We have one agenda item left, which is general discussion. And although it's been quite a long session so far, we might want to get straight into that to potentially finish slightly ahead of time if we're able to, given that it's a Friday afternoon. Some of us are on slightly different time zones, but I think it's pretty much Friday wherever you are in the world at the moment, perhaps with one or two exceptions if you go all the way around. So what I'm going to propose is that we have a very short leg stretch in place, 5-minute break, reconvene at 20 past the hour, and then open it up to general discussion, any comments or questions. And of course, that's an opportunity for you to suggest ways in which we can do things differently or better as well. So short break just to stretch our legs, and see you in 5 minutes. So if I could ask everyone to come back together for the last leg. Again, I appreciate it's been a long day, but I think it's been a really worthwhile day. Lots of different areas covered. Thanks again to all of the members of the UKRN exec who've helped with note-taking during the breakout groups. We'll obviously collate all of that information, synthesize it, and make use of it in various ways, including pushing it back out to the special interest groups for them to digest and absorb in the context of the breakout groups this afternoon, and feed into our sustainability planning discussions in terms of the meetings this morning, or the breakout groups this morning. But now's your chance to ask any questions of the UKRN exec, Neil and myself, of the different member group chairs and advisory committee chairs. We still have Savita with us, although Anna has had to leave. Tell us what we're doing well, what we're not doing so well. Tell us what we could start doing. Tell us what we should stop doing. Anything along those lines.
Hi, Marcus. I'll just chip in because I can't see any of that hands up.
Go ahead.
So apologies if this did get discussed kind of over lunchtime, because I had to nip out for a couple of hours. But kind of when you talked about the report at the start, talked about there being a reproducibility network for Ukraine now, and like it's kind of really impressive, the kind of global reach. And I just wondered whether there were kind of formal plans about kind of building those cross-national like links between those international networks, or if we had kind of plans about what we could do to foster collaborations between those different networks.
So that's a really good question. Thanks for asking it. The answer is that at the moment, the different individual reproducibility networks are at very different stages of their evolution. So obviously UKRN was the first and has been around the longest and is probably the best resourced at the moment, but other reproducibility networks, particularly the Dutch and the Swiss, are very well resourced as well, or at least are resourced. Others are still operating on effectively the goodwill basis that that we started with, although we were lucky to get funding fairly early on. So they're all at very different stages of their evolution, and they're all operating within different national contexts that mean that they need to evolve in slightly different ways. So I don't think any two reproducibility networks will follow exactly the same trajectory, but we do meet regularly. So representatives of those reproducibility networks meet regularly at an online meeting. UKRN currently provides the support to set those meetings up and host them as the original and currently best supported network. But we are looking at ways in which we can obtain some funding to create a central resource, an administrator, for example, to help with the coordination of that global federation of reproducibility networks. And we've just set up a working group that Neil is going to lead on sustainability options for the global federation that will draw on the discussions we've been having around our own sustainability, but obviously will need to look slightly different for the global federation. What we are hoping to do is bring those representatives together at MetaScience 25 in London, where many of them would be attending anyway, as an opportunity to meet as a group. We did that last year in Berlin, so we'll hope to do it again this year. And the idea is that we will try to meet every year or two and to align that with an appropriate meeting that people might be going to anyway. The World Conference on Research Integrity is another example of one. And we'll also use that as an opportunity to meet with representatives of other European funded projects in this kind of space, the Transparency Project, the IRISE project, the Osiris project, Tier 2. Those are examples of EU funded activity that's relevant to that global federation. And we want to make sure that we're doing the joining up and the collaborating that is in that wider ethos of these networks.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Nick.
Thanks, Marcus. It's going to be a quick one. Eventually, in my university, we have discussed about the special interest groups, and we thought that is there any opportunity which we can, with other members here, to co-create or co-propose eventually another special interest group in medical education, for example? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Neil alluded to this earlier. We've got quite a few up and running already, and we don't want to kind of overload our ability to support them. But special interest groups are really a way to bring together the individuals that comprise the UKRN community, whether it be through local networks or ORCAs or institutional leads or whatever. So there's no real constraint on the number of special interest groups that we can have, but the extent to which the UKRN executive can support them will be limited. So the more there are, the less support we can give to each, basically.
Oh, yeah, I fully understand that. Is there any proposal that we need to write, or we would, any?
I think it would be helpful, if people have ideas for special interest groups, if they could be sent to the UKRN admin email address so that we have sight of what people are thinking about, and then we can start to help to create communities around those.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bob.
Neil, do you want to add anything to
that? No, just to reiterate that I think we're seeing this year as exploratory. This is the first year that we're really doing special interest groups in this way, and so we will be working out what the best processes are around them over the course of this year.
If there is a real challenge there, and don't want to challenge things here, and it's a question of workloads and everything, we could create something smaller entity which is more like a working group, which later can emerge as a proper special interest group, if that will help.
Yeah, I mean, I think this will all evolve because, as Neil says, we're kind of feeling our way. But I think if people will identify topics they're interested in, let us know. We might say, go away and have some informal conversations and develop the idea a little bit and come back in 6 months' time or whenever, when we've got a little bit more capacity, and we can just take it one step at a time. But I think if nothing else, it would be useful to surface what ideas are out there and then maybe sequence how we engage with those so that we do things, again, sustainably. Anything else? I don't wish to stand between you and your Friday afternoon/evening. I don't know what it's like across the rest of the UK, but it's sunny in Bristol, so I'm just saying. Tom.
It's not sunny in Sheffield, but I'm hopeful maybe we'll be later. That's not what I wanted to say. I just thinking about bringing new people into UKRN and the way it started with some kind of very energized in-person meetings. We talked about having a UKRN in-person conference at various points, and I wondered if there was any support for that as an idea. I recognise that it's not easy to organise in-person conferences and they have considerable costs, but they also have value in kind of connecting people. Obviously, we've got a lot done today online, but is there any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so we used to have I mean, twice we had these meetings in person, then the pandemic got in the way, and then we realized that actually we could probably achieve much of what we needed to at this meeting by an online meeting, which is less burdensome on people. Given the size of our community, we got to, it wasn't just convenience, we got to a size that was difficult to accommodate in a single place without it costing quite a lot. So I think there's our annual meeting, which we probably will continue to run online, at least in the majority of cases. But the potential to have a conference is something we've been looking at. And again, I'm going to turn to Neil in a moment. We were looking at this, but then with MetaScience being in London in 2025, we thought it would be redundant to have another meeting in the UK around that same time. So that's been put on the back burner, but it's certainly something that is worth considering either individually or jointly. And there's another conference in Bristol this year that Neil may want to speak to that's again close to our interests. Part of it is this perennial issue of capacity. You know, the UKRN executive, however much it's grown, is pretty much at full capacity because it's grown through the project that we've received funding for, like the community project, for example. But in principle, a conference could be part of our sustainability planning because conferences can theoretically be income generating. Will, I'm assuming you want to come in on a related point?
Yeah, the Ground Up project, which we've just had confirmed funding for, that goes till July 2026, has budget in it for running a conference in 2026. So it'll probably be the last action of that project. And we will be looking to bring people together. But I do, the advantages of in-person meetings definitely really high, but also because we are distributed across the whole country, having online meetings is also an essential way to actually make it accessible for all of our members.
Yeah, exactly. And we tried to strike that balance through having, for example, in-person retreats to bring individual member groups together, but also online meetings that, as Will says, are more accessible. And that conference that's factored into that project can perhaps be a way of piloting whether or not we want to have a conference on a rolling basis. Probably not every year, but maybe every couple of years. Neil, anything you want to add to that?
No, thank you.
There we go. Anything else? Everyone knows my facilitative silence trick now. I'm not saying anything until someone blurts something out, so it doesn't work anymore. Well, in that case, as ever, lots of people to thank. I've thanked the core team a couple of times. I would say particular thanks to Neil as well, who really is the driving force behind a huge amount of the work that we're doing at the moment, and without which UKRN would not be anywhere near where it is. So particular thanks to him, but to all of us really. As we've said throughout, this is very much a community effort. I think one of the things that I'm pleased about and seems to be borne out by what people have said today is that spirit that existed when we set ourselves up 6 years ago around being collaborative, a bit about being community-led, about being peer-led, that stayed with us. And hopefully we can retain that, because I think that's absolutely integral to what we're trying to do and to the value that we bring to the sector. Obviously, we are all people who are committed to what we're trying to achieve, but I think we are riding a kind of groundswell of interest in these kinds of things and doing things in a way that is largely bringing the community with us. Still lots of work to do, certainly nowhere near getting to the point where we can turn off the lights and close down operations, because we've got lots that we still need to do, but I think things are moving in the right direction. So thank you all again. The fact that you've so many of you have committed so much time to coming along today, I think indicates exactly what I've been talking about. And again, thank you to everyone who's contributed at every level, in every way. If you read the annual report, there's so much going on. I was genuinely, as someone who should know everything that's going on in principle, I was blown away by just how much has been happening, how mature so many of our activities are, how many people have been involved, like I say, in small ways and large across the whole system. It's really exciting to be part of it. So thank you all. And with that, I think I can formally close the meeting. So enjoy your weekend when it comes. And I'm sure I'll see you all sooner than this, but if not same time next year.